high school, the first thing that might come to your mind are football fields, big cafeterias, hanging out at the lockers, something along those lines, at least to Americans. But here's the thing, not all high schools are the same. I actually had the privilege of being able to go to a German high school when I was only 16 years old with a program called Rotary, and they have this youth exchange program, which is the thing that I actually went through. However, I want to go over the differences between going to an American high school versus a German high school, because they are definitely completely different institutions, and so I just thought it might be a fun little comparison video for anyone who I guess might be interested. So first, some just general facts. Yes, I was pretty popular at first, and then quickly no one really cared. I was one of 3 foreign exchange students actually at the school. It was me, there was a student from Japan, and there was another student from a completely separate program who came from Spain, and so it was nice not being the only one. Very quickly, the German students just weren't very interested in us, and I can get into why that is a little bit later. So classes are pretty much, you know, if you go to class, you go to class. Like, it's school. It was about 45 minute classes, and I don't remember how long it was in between, but it was very short. You could basically run to your locker, because yes, we actually did have lockers, grab books if you needed them, and go straight to your next class. You might have had time to use the restroom, but you kind of had to pick one or the other unless you were very fast. There were 2 15-minute breaks during the day, which is actually the time that you were able to go outside, use the restroom, just get some fresh air and relax. And this is something we did not have at my American school. I think that's actually a pretty big distinction about the day, the way it's just generally set up. English class for me actually was very tricky. People would probably think,
but Emma, English is your first language. It should be a no-brainer.
But actually, no, because as you might be able to tell, I speak standardized North American English. However, at my school, they were teaching British English, which yes, the languages are extremely similar. However, not entirely. Also, English there is taught as English as a foreign language, whereas the English classes that I was used to was English as literature, as the main language. Whereas in Germany, they had their version of German, which would be our version of English in the US or in the UK. So they were focusing on things like past participles and the verb agreements, and those are not typically things that you go over in an English class in the US. So as a native speaker, those weren't things that I was necessarily privy to knowing, and it actually made it really hard because I would fill out things based on what made sense to me rather than what the question was actually asking, and that definitely caused some problems. I did fine, but taking your own language as a foreign language was definitely an experience, because it made me realize that just because you speak a language doesn't mean that you really understand all of like the nitty-gritty aspects of it. And this is something I actually came to appreciate more as I started to learn German during my time there. Another reason why I advocate for learning a foreign language, because I just think it really helps you appreciate your own language and how complicated those things can be. English class, not easy. And then just as an obvious, all of the classes are in German. Otherwise, I was very fortunate that the first class of my first day of school was English class, so I was able to introduce myself to all of my classmates there in English, because the entire class is spoken in English. But then if I were to go to math or history, I actually took a philosophy class, I took biology, all in German. Learning a complicated subject, as I was a junior in high school, if I forgot to mention that, trying to understand those different like scientific literature concepts, historical facts, learning everything in a language that I wasn't fluent in, yeah, it's kind of hard. English is Germanic, which helps, but it definitely took quite some time to start actually grasping what a lot of my teachers were talking about in the first place, just because that language barrier, there we go, is really a much bigger deal than you'd think it would be. But hey, I obviously made it through. I didn't actually fail, believe it or not. I actually did okay, but that's a separate topic. One of the first things, obviously, I mentioned in this little intro was that when you think about, at least with American high schools, you think of like giant cafeterias. Well, that's not really a thing, at least at the school that I went to. And I probably should have prefaced this, is that my experience is going to be individualized to the specific school that I went to in Berlin. I can't say that these aren't things that don't happen in other places, because I don't want someone to go like, oh, well, I live in Germany and they do this at my school. Well, even within the United States, schools do things differently. So this is just my experience with one one particular institution, but there were no lunch periods. Whereas in the US, you might have your cafeteria line with your, like the benches and different tables that you can sit at. That did not happen in Germany, or at least I said at my school. So we did have this one little room. So you actually had to go outside, and then the door it led down a couple stairs into like a little basement, and there was like this like mini, almost like cafe where you could buy sandwiches, and I don't even remember if there were tables. It was the younger students who typically would order the sandwiches and things like that. The older students, we usually did not do that. You either pack some food or you went home. Yeah, you could go home for lunch. And as an American, that's very much a unique concept, because I compare American high schools to prisons, because that's just how I always felt at my particular high school, especially when I came back. They're not really a thing. In the US, you might have your team sports, your club sports, the different clubs after school, I don't know, anime clubs and sewing clubs and different things along those lines. That was not something that I experienced at my school. If you wanted to be involved in a sport, that's something that you had to get involved in within your community. They weren't gonna have soccer clubs at the school. Like, that's just not something that was offered. We also didn't have dances. In the United States, we have prom, homecoming. There were no dances in Germany. Another thing that I was not used to, but I think the biggest thing is the US. We have a very huge culture around high school where it's this whole 4-year experience. In Germany, it's really just you go to school and you study and you take your tests and you graduate and you move on. In the US, it's looked at as a very big cultural thing, as you can also see from a lot of the media that's been exported from the US, movies, TV shows, music, things that really focus heavily on American high school culture. It's just not the same, honestly. And I think that was something that really surprised me too, was just that you're just not as involved at your school. It's a very different experience. People think that because Germany is a first world European country, it's going to be very similar to the US and how things are run, how things are done, how you can expect things to be, and that's just very much not true. One of the things that I think was my biggest shock when I started going to a German school is that it has an open campus concept, which is very similar to how things are run in the universities in the United States. So essentially, if you do not have class, you do not go to class. You do not have to stay at school. That was something that I was very much not used to. As I said before, I do sort of think about American high schools, at least the one that I went to, sort of as like mini prisons, because I couldn't leave. There was security. I mean, it wasn't so bad. It's not like I went somewhere where there were like metal detectors, but you feel very confined and you lose like all sense of, I don't know, freedom of any kind, and it kind of sucks. And I didn't have that because they treated us like adults. They treated us as if we were fully developed human beings that could be responsible. That is really a huge cultural difference. And I do understand why it's different having gone to a German school versus American school, because in the United States, I do think we do have a cultural issue when it comes to behavior and being responsible, self-reliant, not being able to go out of control. Of course, that's not everyone, and I'm not saying everyone in Germany is also, 100% able to be responsible and not cause problems, but there's a very stark difference, I would say, just between the two countries' cultures and how children tend to behave. So being able to be treated like an adult and being able to leave was really nice. Definitely say that it caused some reverse culture shock when I came back. The other thing that's also very much, I would say, like universities there, is that classes could be canceled. So in the US, there's absolutely no way that my class would ever be canceled. They would find a substitute or they'd figure something out. There's no way they would just be like, you're not having class. But in Germany, we would go onto the school website and there'd be a list of the classes that were canceled, or it would say there was a delay or something along those lines. So every day I would go on before I'd go to school and check to see if any of my classes were canceled. And it would be always really nice when it was my first class of the day, and so I wouldn't have to go to class early and I could go back to bed. Tacking onto that, we still did have class periods, like there was a schedule, but you didn't necessarily have class every single period. So if your last one was at 1 or 2, then you would just go home. I loved that. It was great. So this is one that I think is more on the negative side. If you've ever been to Europe, you would know that a lot of the buildings are hundreds of years old. My school building was very old. I don't know when it was actually built, but a lot of these buildings are not really set up for certain things, and I'm talking about air conditioning. We actually didn't have snow days. We would definitely go to school if it was snowing pretty badly. If it's too too hot, that's actually a risk because they could run the risk of someone passing out, fainting, there being an issue. And there was actually one instance where my school did cancel class halfway through the day because of the heat. That was something very different, whereas in the US, if it's really hot, they are not going to cancel class because we have air conditioning throughout the wazoo and because we just like things apparently very cold here. I actually think that that one made a lot of sense. I was bummed about the cold because there were a couple of days where the snow was really bad and I would have loved to have stayed home, but nope, I had to go to school. One of the biggest culture shocks that I actually experienced is during the 15-minute breaks that we would have during the school day, people would go outside of the school gates and they would roll up cigarettes and smoke. And a lot of the time they would actually do it with the teachers. And in the US at least, smoking has become very taboo. We have entire areas where those are the smoking areas. You don't smoke in public buildings, you don't smoke in a lot of public areas, you have to go to designated smoking areas because most people just do not want to smell your cigarette smoke. Extremely different culture in Germany. You couldn't smoke within school grounds, so you did have to go outside the gate. So they would literally be right outside the gate or right across the street smoking during the breaks. As an American, that really freaked me out. I'm like, you guys are 15 years old, 16 years old, like why are you smoking cigarettes? Like that's so bad for you. But it is honestly just a really big cultural difference. That one really got me. And it's not like American kids don't smoke. I'm sure there were definitely people who went to my school and kids still do it today, where they're, sneaking away and smoking a cigarette. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying in Germany, it was directly in front of your face. Whereas in the US, they're probably being a lot more sneaky to not be seen doing that versus they're literally smoking with the teachers. That one was definitely kind of like a wow, yeah, we are not the same. There was no dress code, which was really nice. That was a shock to me. And I think that's just because the dress code at my school was really strict. We couldn't wear hoodies. All of your shirts had to have sleeves. Skirts had to be below your fingertips, which I understand is like general decency. Same thing with shorts though. Your shorts had to be like mid-thigh or longer. Whereas in Germany, you just had to be clothed. Basically, as long as you weren't coming to school in bathing suits or your underwear, you were pretty much good to go. Teachers like weren't calling kids out during class because what they were wearing was considered like inappropriate. And the last thing is sort of just that German friends were really hard to make. In the US, I feel as if in school people are very buddy-buddy. Everyone's trying to make friends and get into social groups. Hey, let's hang out on the weekend. And that just wasn't my experience. In high school in the US, it's an entire experience. It's just not the same. Whereas in Germany, like they're really going to school to go to class and study, to graduate and leave and move on with their lives. They're studying really, really hard. And if I remember the name of the test, there's this big test. You could maybe compare it to the SAT. If I remember correctly, I think it's called the Abitur. Studying to pass this test. And they're just really focusing on studying to be able to get into universities, to pass the Abitur. And so it's not that they weren't going out like doing things. I also think that Germans might establish their friend groups like really early on, and it's just hard to break into them. I did make some recently, had a friend of mine who I went to school with who was here in New York City, and I got to see him and his girlfriend, and that was really nice that he took the time. I am still maintaining some of those relationships, and I really appreciate that. But in general, I just didn't make that many German friends. I think I made 2, and everyone else was a foreign exchange student. That definitely, I think, did skew a lot of my view and my opinions. But hey, I did the best that I could. Do I think one is better than the other? No. I think they're extremely different institutions, and I do think that each has their pros and cons. If I were to ever do it all over again, I probably would choose a German high school over an American high school, but that's just because I believe that the way that they treat German students as adults that can make their own decisions and be responsible, and if you're going to screw up, they'll let you fail, is honestly a really good life lesson, whereas in the US, they don't do that. And I just didn't appreciate the way that my school in the US treated me and treated the students versus the way that Germany does. But I really just think that boils down to the culture that the countries have. If you've ever wanted to be a foreign exchange student, I highly recommend it. I do recognize that it is a huge privilege. Rotary Youth Exchange is actually, I think, one of the most affordable ways to go about it. Most of the cost was actually covered by my sponsoring club, whereas a lot of other places you have to pay for it completely out of pocket. So that's really how I was able to go. If you have questions about more about my time there, go ahead and leave them below. Thank you so much. I hope this was fun. I really enjoyed my time in Berlin. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!
Slow down, hold on tight. say to me.